Have an exciting night. Welcome everyone who's coming to join us for the IDM Scholar Society Study Club. We have a great meeting tonight. We're so excited to share a new friend with you and the work that she's doing. And so we're just waiting a minute or two for our colleagues to join us, and then we'll jump in to a wonderful discussion. Camille Ann Rice says, hi, your friend.
Hello.
While we're waiting a minute or two for some more folks to join us, I want to share with you that Camille Zenobia is going to be talking to us tonight about her work with as an oral microbiologist. But here are a couple of her publications that she has written: The Relationship of the Oral Microbiota to Periodontal Health and Disease, Commensal Bacteria-Dependent Select Expression of CXCL2 Contributes to Periodontal Tissue Homeostasis, P. gingivalis, and rabbit studies, just all kinds of things about P. gingivalis and its virulence factors, involving some of the immune system interaction and interleukin 17 and other factors like that, and gingival inflammation and different variations among folks. So, I mean, just I could go on and on and on about the work and research that Camille's been doing, but I think we'll go ahead and get started, Camille, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're excited to have you with us.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and you live in Hampton, New Jersey. Where is that relative to New York City?
I'm about an hour and 20 out. I'm closer to Pennsylvania, but still kind of middle of the state. There's a little precious town people like to come to called Clinton, New Jersey, and we're right next door.
Okay, all right. And Pennsylvania was part of your education. Camille's background is she graduated from the University of Washington School of Medicine with a PhD in microbiology. And then she did a postdoctoral fellowship in oral immunology at the University of Pennsylvania. Since then, she's worked in research in very wonderful places like Colgate-Palmolive for 5 years as a clinical senior scientist and research scientist there. So her background in research as a microbiologist has been quite extensive, which is exciting to us because that's something that most of us in clinical dentistry, have not been involved in, not to that degree for sure. And now she serves as the chief executive officer of Os Salutum, which she started about 2 years ago. And you can tell us more about that, Camille. But I also want to mention in our introduction that you have a podcast, and that's called Let's Get Oral, very appropriate. And also you can visit at Instagram, Camille's site there, which is @Oral Health Activist. at Oral Health Activists. And so, Camille, we've been introduced to you from our dear friend Ann Rice, and she emailed me and Laura and Gina and Tom Neighbors and said, I have somebody you've got to meet. She's fabulous and she's brilliant and she's on the cutting edge and she's doing the things that we want to learn about. And so she introduced us and we had a chance to visit and had a wonderful visit together. And at the end of that conversation, we agreed that if it was possible, that you were available to join us for our study club, that we would love to have you come and share your work with us. And so that's how we got together. And we've only known each other about a month or two, but we're looking forward to a long relationship and one that will be part of IDM Scholar Society as well. And so, Camille, thank you for joining us again tonight. And we're excited about what you're going to share with us. So I want to turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. I'm thrilled to be here with my people and hopefully contribute some new information to you. I definitely oriented my talk around the oral systemic relationship because I think, we all have to be mindful of both sides of this equation, but really in the context of inflammation. I think inflammation is where we need to set our new scope to really have an updated and mindful approach to how we address oral health starting now and into the future. And so I'll kind of dig into some of those pieces shortly. I think you did a nice job on my background. Let's see if I can get this going. There we go. But I did want to cover some of those pieces. My first career was actually as a hairdresser, which put me in Seattle, owning a couple spas. I ended up being an educator for Aveda, which opened my eyes to the opportunity that is product science. And from there, because I had that exposure, I was really interested in researching. So I fell into infectious disease at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center, moved into microbiology with Richard Darveau at University of Washington. And like you said, worked with George Hadji-Shingalis at University of Pennsylvania. Both of these people, very prominent periodontal researchers. I even did some of my thesis work at Forsyth with Tom Van Dyke. And I went on to work with Colgate, and I went from bench scientist to clinical science, running some of their clinical trials. And one of my projects there won a research award last year from the AAP. And so we were very excited about that to get that attention. And then today I currently work in medical affairs. I have started an oral care company, which is why I had to leave Colgate. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity. I'm also running the Let's Get Oral podcast because I really want to drive attention and excitement around the opportunities that are involved in understanding oral biology. There's a lot of exciting things that we're learning daily in all aspects of oral health. I continue as an editor for both Nature and Frontier oral health sections. So I really want to be part of the frontier science that is oral health. So with that, what I'd like to cover in this talk is talk about that reciprocal relationship between the oral systemic health pieces and dive into, oral mucosal immunology. I'm going to try to simplify some of these pieces to make it really approachable and understandable, because I need to talk to you about the interrelationship that is the oral microbiome and inflammation, because that will help us discover kind of new ways as we shift away from a more antiseptic approach. And then I'm going to showcase my thoughts on a new innovative approach to oral care. So to get started, I'm preaching to the choir here. Periodontal disease has long been linked to many different comorbid conditions. This review highlighted here by Hadji-Shingalis has a really nice discussion around the reciprocity of that relationship. So we know that people with oral pathology, periodontal disease are at higher risk for development of cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and so on. We know the reverse is true. If they already have a systemic inflammatory process happening like cardiovascular disease, that puts their oral health at risk, and they're more likely to develop periodontal disease. So this is a two-way relationship, and they're very much related. They're related by inflammation. To talk about some of those inflammation pieces, I have to kind of go to the kindergarten level of immunology. For those of you who are less familiar, we have two arms of the immune system. We have the innate immune system, which is our rapid response. So these are typically like your dendritic cells, your macrophages, your granulocytes. I'll say neutrophil 1,000 times in this talk. There's a good reason why. Then we have our adaptive immune arm, and this is slower to respond. I think everybody's familiar with wanting a vaccine or wanting to develop immunity to something like COVID so that we don't have to be taken down by it anymore. And so this is really our adaptive immune system, B cells and T cells. It takes them about 7 to 10 days to learn about a new pathogen. So that said, as we have dug into this immune system landscape, we have developed a new understanding with regard to mucosal immunology. So if we think of ourselves as a big tube, with the inner lining being our digestive tract, starting with our mouth, into our stomach, intestinal system, and out to the other side, we have these very specialized tissues that harbor a massive microbiome. Just 12 years ago, we were learning that our adaptive immune system is really uniquely informed by our our gut microbiome, and that it can influence our health functions and our inflammatory backdrop. Just a mere 12 years later, we're learning that our microbiome is actually producing ligands for our innate and adaptive immune system to teach and educate in a continuing fashion both arms of the immune system. They're producing neurotransmitters, they're producing hormones, they're regulating our hormones, they're part of our metabolic health structure, and they can be at this point considered an organ that is essential for health. And I think with this new appreciation, we're starting to reconsider our treatment paradigms in many different and nuanced ways. We know that certain cancer treatments don't work for some people because of their gut microbiome. So we're having to learn real time how to shift our treatment paradigms and think on our feet. And so my talk is really kind of trying to open your eyes in looking at the microbiome piece with the inflammation piece in a new way. So next, moving into oral immunology, we know a lot about the gut as far as mucosal immunology, but we're really at like the infantile stage with oral immunology. We know very basically that there are, in a healthy situation, neutrophils, a few T cells, and some phagocytes. We know that in a healthy mouth, neutrophils are pouring into the cavity at 60,000 neutrophils per minute. 60,000 neutrophils per minute in a healthy mouth. If you talk to any immunologist, if you said there's a neutrophil there, they would say, that's because there's an infection. But we know now that neutrophils are imperative for a healthy functioning gingival tissue. Some of my work with Darvaux and Haji Shingalis had me looking at germ-free mice. These are mice with no microbiome. They're raised in sterile conditions, not very healthy. And you can see in their gingival tissues, they have some neutrophils here. We can count them when we go through the tissues and enumerate them. When we add back bacteria and make them these normal, healthy, wild type mice, we see that their neutrophil load increases. We found in that research that the neutrophils that come in during a germ-free situation are regulated differently than the neutrophils that are coming in for the microbial relationship. There are different conversations happening for those different neutrophil phenotypes. I bring this to your attention because there's an ongoing conversation real time between our neutrophils, which are part of our innate rapid immune response system. They're part of our surveillance system in our healthy gingival tissues. And we have to keep an eye on that neutrophil biology. On the other side of the story, we are all hopefully very well versed in Sokransky and Kohlenbrander, their basic principles of microbial succession. So back then, we had color-coded all of the microbial community members as they develop on the tooth surface into a full microbiome, with green and yellow being our early colonizers, orange, red coming in later. Kohlenbrander nicely described their interrelationships, their adhesion properties, how they stick together in a biofilm relationship. Now we understand that the microbiome builds these beautiful corncob structures that remain intact as you develop disease, but they change into the taxonomy profile. So as we move into a pathology like periodontal disease, we actually get a higher diversity of bacteria. This is very different from the gut, where we see a decrease in diversity during pathology. So we can't necessarily extrapolate our learnings from the gut into the mouth. I have this beautiful picture that came out of Forsyth where they stained a plaque sample to give us a visual representation of that corncob structure. What I'd like to point your attention to is this is a healthy plaque sample. This is somebody that doesn't have any inflammation, and yet we see Porphyromonas gingivalis. I bring this up because Porphyromonas gingivalis has been thought of as this periopathogen for maybe too long. And yes, it has virulence factors. Yes, it can be terrible. Why isn't this person progressing even though they have Porphyromonas gingivalis? What is the stimulator that progresses this person into a gingivitis or periodontal disease situation? To talk about how that happens, let's next talk about the keystone hypothesis. So this is a fairly new hypothesis that was developed by Haji Shingalis, Richard Darvaux, Michael Curtis in around 2011. And what they extrapolated from the gut research was this idea of a keystone pathogen, a bacterial member of our commensal microbiome that can alter the environment in a given situation that creates a dysbiotic microbiome that then all together causes disease. So it's not just PG causing the problem, it's an instigator that then allows PG to develop into a pathogenic profile and alter the environment such that the dysbiotic microbiome then creates inflammation and disease. The initial driver is inflammation. The initial driver in that research study was a ligature around a tooth that provided the inflammatory stimulus for Porphyromonas gingivalis to change. What's happening? Here's one piece of a very complex story, just to give you an idea of what Porphyromonas gingivalis can do under inflammatory settings. So this relative luciferase assay is a toll-like receptor 4 assay. Our toll-like receptor 4 is really good and adept at reacting to E. coli endotoxin. It gives a robust signal. You can see here in gray, E. coli LPS, very stimulatory. If we then add a mixture of E. coli LPS with Porphyromonas gingivalis LPS that's grown at normal healthy body temperature, we get a blocking of some of that LPS activity. So what I'm saying is, in a natural environment that is a healthy person, Porphyromonas gingivalis endotoxin is blocking your ability to see E. coli LPS. When we turn up the temperature to 41 for Porphyromonas gingivalis, that inhibition is gone. Now we can see E. coli LPS again. So this is one way that Porphyromonas gingivalis can alter itself in those environmental conditions that look like inflammation. And this is why I wrote a review last year talking about how our inflammatory profile can set the stage for altering our oral microbial endotoxin phenotype that could then prime or tolerize our immune system and change our phenotype permanently, which we saw for COVID infections. People with periodontal disease had worse outcomes, higher mortality, higher risk for long COVID. It's because their backdrop, their immune phenotype has been permanently altered. This is one theory as to why that's happening. But again, it's that inflammation piece that alters the profile of Porphyromonas gingivalis, allowing chronic inflammation to go unchecked. This is a nice review by Tom Van Dyke out of Forsyth that stepwise explains this inflammation first theory. So we all, as hygienists, dentists, we've all seen people that can be high plaque formers, but never develop into gingivitis. Why is that? Well, you need an inflammatory moment, whether that is a genetic component or an environmental insult, a tissue injury. There has to be an inflammatory stimulus for that plaque to become a gingivitis moment, if you will, and progress into periodontal disease. There has to be inflammation. From there, we know that similar to the gut, Porphyromonas gingivalis and many other members of our commensal oral bacteria can manipulate both arms of the innate and adaptive immune system. Probably most of the time it's to our benefit, but when inflammation goes unchecked, then we have the opportunity for immune printing and a change in phenotype. So what are these drivers of dysbiosis? Pretty much anything that has to do with initiating inflammation, smoking, high fat, high sugar diet, tissue injury, infection, stress, and of course, genetic factors. I bring up genetic factors not to go into the onslaught of potential genetic risk factors, but it's a way for me to pivot into some really provocative research that came out of Haji Shingalis's lab that I don't think ever got the light of day that it deserved. So MFGE8 is a natural protein that we make in our bodies. It's a natural regulator of inflammation. We know that there are certain alleles that predispose people to develop lupus that have to do with this MFGE8 factor. We know that people with lupus are at high risk for developing periodontal disease because it's an inflammation regulation issue. So back in 2014, or a little before then, Haji Shingalis and Toshi were looking at MFGE8 in the mouse model of periodontal disease. What you're seeing here is unligated control, a wild type mouse, and a mouse that's unable to produce MFGE8. You can see that when they're ligated, the MFGE8 knockout has worse bone loss than the wild type. Along with that bone loss comes an increased microbial load. So this is colony forming units, which means the number of bacteria associated with that mouth. So MFGE8 has a higher microbial burden with that worse bone loss. Next, we have a plate of bacteria. This is just a control showing that we can inhibit that bacteria with a standard antimicrobial drug, but MFGE8 on its own is not an antimicrobial drug It is just a natural regulator of inflammation. Finally, they take a wild type mouse and they ligate it, but this time they add a recombinant MFGE8. So they're painting this protein on the surface of the mouth where that ligature is. And they show that they can have less bone loss and less bacterial load. So the inflammation is driving the microbial overgrowth, allowing that dysbiotic community to drive bone loss. If we prevent that and protect and regulate that inflammation, we can protect that wild type mouse from bone loss. So when we're thinking about inflammation, when we think about oral pathology, we're looking at the immune cells as an alert system for understanding inflammation load. So we know that during periodontal pathology, there are a number of immunological events, but the most striking is a hyperreactive abundance of neutrophils. They are there, they change phenotype. Glogauer out of University of Toronto has done a lot of work to describe these unique phenotypes that are seen in health and disease, and has gone on for the last 20 years to enumerate them, to stratify them with regard to each stage of health, gingivitis, and periodontal stage 1 through 4. The reason I bring him up is because later this year, he will be issuing a chairside device that will be between $10 and $14 per test, very affordable. It'll be color coded so that it'll just change color if there's any inflammation. I think this will be a nice way to quickly screen anybody for inflammation and be able to test if there's a treatment intervention that is working. So when we're thinking of that mindful approach to the patient, really having a solid understanding of their systemic inflammatory profile, any pathologies that might be in their backdrop, but also their mouth. So we know that, for example, with type 2 diabetes, we can get an improvement in their glycemic control by giving them good periodontal treatment. We also know that if we just control that diabetes background, they have better oral health outcomes. So we have to be mindful, where is the inflammation? Is it controlled or not controlled? I could have said cardiovascular disease. I could have said a number of other inflammatory pathologies, but we have to be mindful of both sides of this equation. The next thing I'd like to talk about is what we're learning in mucosal immunology, the importance of the oral microbiome, and contrast it with our approach to oral care. All of our oral care is based on this 1950s pathogen principle that says, remove everything. Antimicrobial, antiseptic, remove everything. And I think that all of us can appreciate that there's now nuance in this conversation. And there's not a lot of kind of innovative technologies in this space. And so we're going to have to get creative and think real time on our feet how we might want to intervene. We know that chlorhexidine has been a huge learning experience recently as we start to appreciate the nitric oxide story, and that you so nicely wrote about recently. And we've seen that chlorhexidine can basically deplete those microbial constituents that allow for that nitric oxide production and potentially put us at risk for heart disease. We've seen a bump in mortality with that chlorhexidine use. We've seen an increased risk of diabetes with over-the-counter mouthwash. All of these are having us reconsider how we mitigate the insult that we know can happen. Haji Shingalis's work, treating the inflammation side of that story, we can get back to controlling that dysbiotic microbiome. some of the things I'd like you to keep in mind are all of these formulas are primarily focused on your hard tissues, your teeth, not your gum health. Gum health is largely ignored, and therefore many of the products on the shelf contain irritants for some. If we start thinking about oral care like we do skin care, there's going to be some people who are uniquely sensitive and some people who are just fine using a bar soap on their face. Similarly, we need to think about the ingredients that are in our toothpaste. Fluoride, I think fluoride can be a benefit. I think that fluoride formulated in a complex formula may be problematic for some. We know that fluorosis is on the rise, and excess fluoride can actually have a negative impact on our oral bone. I bring up this diabetes study that was released back in 2018 that studied type 1 and type 2 diabetes, showing that they had a high risk of cavities, but they also had a high incidence of fluorosis. So not more fluoride isn't going to be helpful for these people. We have to find new ways. Stannous and phosphate are both irritants for some, cause major tissue sloughing for some. Same with sodium lauryl sulfate. Glycerin products don't get enough airtime. Glycerin on its own is potently anti-inflammatory. The second you start formulating with it, you can get degradation products that are glyceraldehydes, which are potently inflammatory. We know that essential oils for some are irritants. So all of these things we have to keep in mind when we have patients that are coming in that have that claim to have perfect oral hygiene, and yet you're still seeing some issues. Maybe it's just a matter of changing their products. So I have been working on a formula for a while that is targeting some of these pathways of inflammation, specifically around neutrophil biology. The company that I developed around this technology is Os Salutem, which is mouth well-being. And it really is, I'm trying to create a new conversation around the way we think about oral health hygiene, to put it more in the space of skincare and caring and health and beauty, as opposed to like, I'm cleaning my kitchen sink and it now has a buildup. I think that it's a way to improve the way we care about our mouths. And so the ingredients that I'm going to talk about, niacinamide and hyaluronan. Both of these are widely used in skincare products, and they're very well known for anti-inflammatory benefits. To be clear, niacinamide is the main ingredient in both the toothpaste and the mouth serum. I'm going to spend 1 second on hyaluronan. Hyaluronic acid is part of our natural tissue. It's a potent anti-inflammatory, can prevent edema. It's been well studied in the oral cavity to a benefit. We see a lot of it being used ex-US because it's actually indicated in the EU for gingivitis and periodontal disease, but there's no indication here in the US. So I'm using it as a delivery system. The next discussion I want to have is around niacinamide. The reason it's never been used in an oral product is not because probably nobody has ever thought of it, but because it's bitter. And nobody likes a bitter product, apparently. I can't taste it personally, but the benefit is that it has the ability to induce antimicrobial peptides on its own. This graph is basically saying it cannot inhibit Staph aureus, for example, but when it's combined with an antimicrobial, we know it can induce the expression of LL37, for example. And LL37 can inhibit some of this Staph aureus growth, but when it's in combination with niacinamide, you get a synergistic effect. So it works naturally to induce some of those antimicrobial benefits, but it also works synergistically with them. But the real reason I was working with niacinamide was because it attenuates neutrophil pathology in an LPS setting. So this is a mouse model of LPS inflammation where they used E. coli LPS to induce the inflammation in the lung of a group of mice. And so what you're seeing here is LPS stimulating a whole lot of neutrophils into that lung tissue. If you pre-treat with niacinamide, you get a reduction in some of those neutrophils. If you treat after the LPS exposure, you get a huge decrease in neutrophil pathology. So that's really why I was initially looking at this ingredient. I will say that I have an amazing flavorist who has helped me develop the flavor of of this technology so that it doesn't taste bitter. But I've been also working with Dr. Glogauer at University of Toronto, who's really been pivotal in understanding neutrophil biology with regard to periodontal inflammation. So we're taking his work and testing niacinamide accordingly. So these are the receptors that are typically upregulated during periodontal disease. And we're taking periodontal patients, we take out their neutrophils out of their mouths, and we test the niacinamide in different concentrations, and you can see a nice titratable effect of some of these inflammatory receptors on the neutrophils. I call out CD14 here because that's specifically involved in LPS endotoxin recognition. So that's what we're doing as far as research. I also ran a consumer test because, as I said, I can't taste bitter compounds, so I needed a lot of people to taste it to tell me it was okay. And so while I did this, 44 people were sampled. 10 of them, I forced them into the dental chair to get periodontal probing measurements before they received the product. And then they had to get probing measurements at least 2 to 4 months after being on the product. So this is one clinical baseline. This patient went in to see her dentist in August of last year, clearly has some gingivitis, has some periodontal pockets. And then 2 months after being on our product, you can see in October, she went back and you can see that she went, took this pocket from a 6 to a 5, this pocket from an 8 to a 6, and this 5 to a 4. We still see some bleeding, we still see some pores. We know that some of these pocket depths might be permanent. We are moving to a clinical to get a better sense, but my 2 questions for this consumer test were, am I making anything worse? Am I improving anything? Do I have any level of evidence? And so I have quite a bit of evidence for improvement. I have some user testimonials suggesting that they have less irritation, less inflammation, fresher breath, smoother teeth. I had one patient who had been going to the periodontist for about 5 years because she kept progressing and they couldn't stabilize her deep pockets. And this was the first time in 5 years that she's found stability. So that was a fun story. I also have my aunt's husband who has Alzheimer's. He's in his 70s. He also has type 2 diabetes, and he was scheduled to have 2 teeth removed. And I thought, well, they're removing them anyway. I'll send you some product, please test it. So he was on our product for a month, and he went in to go get his teeth pulled, and they have stabilized, so they are not pulling them at this time. That said, I had my whole dentist practice, so this is where I go see my dentist, and I had all of the dentists and the hygienists testing the product, and they have a very beauty-centric clientele. They have a med spa as part of their service, and they have found that most of the practice, the patients refuse fluoride products in every form. And so they're pretty frustrated at they don't know what to give to their patients because they don't feel like any non-fluoride toothpaste has a level of evidence that they feel good about. And so they're looking at our products as hopefuls. And he also, this particular dentist, Dr. Dean, he also found that the mouth serum helped overcome his issues with mouth ulcers that he gets fairly regularly. So in closing, oral immunology is still in its infancy. We're still learning real time what is happening in this space with regard to the microbiome in all of its nuance. We know that oral inflammation is the key, the driver for dysbiosis. If we can treat the inflammation, we can get the dysbiosis to come back to what it should be in a healthy situation. Our current hygiene products might be contributors, and we have to keep that in mind. Treating inflammation is the key to overall health, no matter which side of the fence that you're looking at, whether it's your systemic health or your oral health. Inflammation unchecked is no good. So next steps for OSA, we're working on a pilot right now, clinical. Glogauer is running it. We just completed a market strategy test to understand how we communicate this brand opportunity. We're looking at it no later than June product launch. We're looking for money as any startup. I'm on Instagram at Oral Health Activist, and I'm always talking on Let's Get Oral. So that's what I have for you today. Please hit me with questions.
Thank you, Camille. Fascinating and so scientifically informative for us. Sure, let's open it up for questions. If Kim, can people unmute themselves?
Yeah, they can unmute themselves, or they can submit a question in the chat.
Right.
It looks like we do already have one question in the chat.
Right, asking about whether niacinamide is a form of vitamin B3.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay, gang. What questions do you have? What thoughts are you having, or questions and insights? We've always had sort of a chicken and egg situation, and it sounds like what we're leaning toward now, Camille, is that we're starting with inflammation, and that this is the driver that we're responding to immunologically. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know that there are genetic factors involved and
Sure.
and environmental factors. I mean, certainly the Western diet can cause periodontal disease and gut dysbiosis all at once and create a whole host of problems. I think that became evident during COVID. So again, we're all learning real time here, but the inflammation first theory does hold. It does explain why you can have such heavy plaque formers not develop because somehow they're protected. It's a complicated story, and we have so much to learn.
Elizabeth asks, how can we sign up to be part of the product testing?
Well, I have closed the consumer test, unfortunately, but I'm happy to send anybody in this chat samples, small samples. So you can always contact me through the Instagram, or OsaCare has a direct communication with me as well.
Great, great. And Leonard asked, the niacinamide needs LL37 to work?
No, absolutely not. I think that in the oral tissues, it is more potently involved with the neutrophil story than it is induction of antimicrobial peptides. But I think that, so the reason I'm exploring the antimicrobial story is because it has been really well published, and there is that piece in the gingival tissues. But the reason I'm exploring it is because the clinical evidence looks like we're having a strong impact in in biofilm all over, even on the tongue, which is not where I see neutrophil biology. So I'm wondering if there is a more a stronger story for that antimicrobial induction, so that we are looking at that.
Hmm. And Camille, I don't know if you met Leonard Pastrana, but he is a PhD researcher in peptides and is a pharmacologist and doing some fascinating work. And he's going to be with us at our upcoming symposium in about 2 weeks and a day. And we're excited to learn from him too. But I bet you two could have some wonderful conversations together, and we'll make sure that happens in the future.
Excellent.
Super, yeah. Asked, do patients with perio have a deficiency in B3?
That's a great question that has not been asked.
Okay. All right. And LJ asks, I have a lot of patients asking about hydroxyapatite. Any thought on the use of it in this regard?
I mean, I've definitely considered putting it in a version, in the future, but I don't know, quite frankly. We are getting such a great outcome with less biofilm overall, and the hydroxyapatite story is compelling, but again, the fluoride story in itself can only do so much against the Western diet. I think that I don't know how provocative it is. I think that treating inflammation is perhaps more efficient. And so I think, again, there are a lot of questions that I don't have answers to here, but I will say this. For anybody who was in my consumer test group that I was worried about developing cavities, I forced them, or at least had them consider a fluoride varnish while they were at the dentist, because I wanted to make sure that they were covered. I didn't want to cause any more harm. So again, I'm trying to use all the tools at our disposal that can provide a benefit, and that was what I could do at the time.
Okay. Mary Isaacs has a very interesting question that may be difficult to answer, but she says, we've been testing with HR5 salivary testing. So that's our 5 high-risk pathogens, okay, with salivary testing. And PG has been found in healthy-looking mouths. And after protocols with antibiotics and Stella-Life antimicrobial, laser, etc., we haven't been able to get rid of it. Is it because it's the good PG with no inflammation?
I think I would bet money that Porphyromonas gingivalis is regulating our inflammatory backdrop more than we realize, and to our benefit. But when inflammation is unchecked, it provides an opportunity for Porphyromonas gingivalis to become a more virulent bacterial component. And so it's a complicated story that will develop. So one of the things that I was trying to do was create awareness around the opportunity that I think the oral microbiome is to inform and educate our immune system at large. And I think the endotoxin piece is an important thing to consider. Many vaccines contain an irritant like endotoxin. So GSK has a whole portfolio of vaccines that use an endotoxin like substance. And to be honest, I was actually in discussions with them around a technology involving Porphyromonas gingivalis endotoxin, because there is an opportunity to shape your immune profile with those pieces. And I think in a healthy situation, it is providing some of those positive adjuvant features that will tailor our approach to a new pathogen. And so I think it might be an important player. I would hate to see a vaccine against Porphyromonas gingivalis succeed, honestly, because I think we might learn that it's been providing a benefit too late.
Gina, did you want to ask a question or talk with Camille about your thoughts?
I do. I have several, but I have one main question. And that is when you talk about the bacterial endotoxins, and it's fascinating to think about the metabolic endotoxemia, as you've described it. And we see a similar concept in the endothelium of the vasculature. And I'm just wondering if you've read any or been involved in any research to know how we can compare and contrast that. I'm sure it's slightly different and yet similar in some ways. Like we know there's virulence of some of these bacteria in the vulnerable plaque, and have thought, okay, we have to eradicate, all of these. And yet we also appreciate that is nuanced, as you say. It's really to finessing, allowing the appropriate response from the immune system versus blasting everything. Just any comments on that or any research?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen that in periodontal disease versus health, we have different endotoxin phenotypes in the plaque overall. Porphyromonas gingivalis provides a nice opportunity to discuss very specific endotoxin, but the overall microbial biofilm has an endotoxin flavor, if you will, and it changes during the progression to disease, which could alter the way that we deal with pathogens. But also when we look at blood microbiome, we're looking at neutrophils that are moving through your vasculature that are stuffed full of bacteria. Some of this bacteria is oral derived, and we know that that's how some of these microbial plaques can develop in the vasculature, is because they've traveled within a cell and then the cell died and created this plaque in that space. So those will naturally have endotoxin features. If there was periodontal disease, it's going to be a very different endotoxin profile than if you had a healthy plaque moving through. So we know that in health and disease, we all have a blood microbiome, and that the oral species are often found in that blood microbiome. In periodontal disease, you have a mess because you have slight periobacteremia. And so there are unhoused bacteria also floating in the vasculature. So they have a whole different potential endotoxin phenotype because they're exposed to the vasculature system, which is very different environment. So there's a lot of conversations to have. We have no answers. I can only theorize what is happening.
Thank you so much. I love this discussion. There, as we said earlier before we got on this call, we're learning so much, and yet there's so much that's yet to be learned. So thank you for your research and your excellent presentation tonight.
Thank you.
I want to read another question from LJ. It says, I have seen a tremendous amount of caries increase in patients that have had gastric bypass, sometimes leading to complete edentulism or edentulation, it says. It is unstoppable and not responsive to intervention, in my experience. Just putting it out there, if there's any idea for research into this field, especially since Medicaid care covers this surgery more and never discusses the negative outcome with patients.
Oh, I have no words other than I'm going to go deep dive on that as soon as I can.
Okay.
I mean, I would assume that there is a change in pH happening, but there is also an inflammatory piece. So when this is a personal story that I just went through. I had diverticulitis over Thanksgiving, unfortunately. And I started to have oral pathology because all of my guts were incredibly inflamed. And it was clearly related to the gut situation. So again, like both sides of that systemic piece are important. And I was learning that real time, unfortunately. But I mean, that's been evident in the literature. We know that IBS carries a risk for periodontal disease if it's not what caused the gut dysfunction in the first place. They're very interrelated, and I don't think we have a handle on that whatsoever. I didn't know what to do for me other than like treat the inflammation, get the inflammation down systemically, and that, you know, in the end helped my oral issue.
Mhm.
But again, I think it's the inflammation piece that is left uncontrolled that would be part of that ongoing issue for the patient.
Mhm. Makes sense. Yeah. Well, you have given us so much to think about. And I love how we're trying to kind of knit together the pieces of a complicated puzzle. But it is coming together, and your work is so invaluable. And we're so thankful for you and the many thousands of hours you've dedicated to learning this science and then developing new science and even treatments. And we're fascinated as a group to follow your work, and as you come out with your products, you know, to keep us informed so that we can communicate with each other and try these things. We would really love to do that. I want to ask you, we're going to be having gatherings, many in the future, and we're planning in a year to get together for another symposium. We're having one in 2 weeks. Would you come join us next year and be there with us for the weekend and share your expertise and just allow us to spend some time interacting together with you and learning more of your work?
I would absolutely love that opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a official invitation, and we're so grateful that you could do that. Kim, I want to just go ahead and wrap things up for tonight. I think we're all saturated with great information that we need to really digest. So I don't want to get into anything else. I just want to think about what Camille's been talking about. And so I don't know if you have a slide, Kim, for our upcoming symposium. And you have information there, everyone, in the chat. But in 2 weeks from tomorrow, we have our upcoming IDM Scholar Society Revolution Symposium, and this will be our first one. This is really our big kickoff for IDM Scholar Society. And we have 16 different speakers, all of whom are scholarly and clinically outstanding, people like Camille, who are going to come and share their work with us and just expand our horizons, and more importantly, I think, help us know how to begin to clinically implement the things that we're learning. And so, yeah, here's the slide on that and the pictures of those that'll be coming to be with us. And so we still have room for more. And I know many of you have expressed the fact that you want to come join us. I know some of you on this call have not signed up yet. And so we do have room for you, and we want you to be there. And this is the kind of interaction that's going to stimulate you to bigger and better things. And just, I always find, motivate me to almost be embarrassed that I'm not doing more than I'm already doing. And I want to do like these great people that are leading the way. And so please go ahead and get on the site there where you can sign up and come be with us in 2 weeks. We want to be with you in person, and we're going to have a fun time in Florida. It's beautiful here right now, and it'll be a rich time of sharing, but also learning. So we certainly want to make sure you know that we have room for you and want you to be there with us. Gina, anything you want to add before we sign off for tonight? Or Kim, anything else we need to mention?
I don't think I have anything else to add. Thanks everyone for attending. A great group, and again, a great presentation.
Yeah.
If you haven't signed up, will join us for the symposium. It's going to be a fantastic time.
Yeah. Anything else from your end, Kim, tonight?
No, I don't think so. If people are interested in what we're doing at the symposium, they can check out that link that's in chat and see our full agenda, all of our speakers, and we hope to see you there.
Right, it gives all the details of it, and it's going to be amazing. We have 5 or 6 dentists, 5 or 6 hygienists, I think 3 physicians, 2 PhDs, a nutritionist. It's, we've tried to cover the gamut. So anyway, thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and we'll see you in 2 months for our next study club meeting. Invite your friends to come join us. As you know, well, there's no cost at all to be involved in the study club, and we want as many people as possible to grow into this community that we're putting together that is going to become a revolution in dentistry and medicine. Camille, thank you again so much. Keep up the good work and keep us informed, and we'll keep passing on whatever you share with us to our colleagues in the IDM Scholar Society, so they can stay in touch with you, but also with what you're doing, and maybe products that we can begin to use in our practices. So, okay, take care, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.